Welcome to another episode of the Josh Johnson Leadership Podcast. Today, we get to talk with the chaplain of an online high school. How can spiritual formation happen online? What was it like in that space during the pandemic? And is Gen Z more spiritually open? Let's get into that conversation right now. Well, why don't we start off with having you share your name, what you do, and how long you've been doing it.
Great. I am Samantha Farinacci, and I work at Oaks Christian Online. And this is my 15th year there, which I'm honored to report because it means that I am happy to share that I was a founding member of Oaks Christian Online. And so we've been in existence for 15 years, and I am I oversee kind of three areas of the school. The spiritual formation component of the school. And then I also speak into the kind of youth culture component of the school. And then also theological engagement, which is our way of helping our courses speak to the underlying truths of who God is. So those are kind of the three buckets that I get to be a part of at the school.
And all of that falls under the same job title?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Tell me again what your job title is.
Yeah. So I'm the chaplain at Oaks.
You're the
Christian
chaplain.
Online.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah. And then I also teach as well. Yeah.
Okay. Mm-hmm. I don't know if I guess I kind of knew from previous conversations some of those elements, but that's a lot of, you're not just working with the youth, you're also helping shape, I guess, the vibe, the culture of the online school. And the Oaks is not just an online school, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So Oaks Christian is a physical campus as well in Westlake, California. And the online program started, like I said, 15 years ago as kind of a way of taking what was meaningful and what was working in Westlake and seeing if the reach could expand, into, of course, the internet's everywhere in the world. So that was kind of the logic behind it. And so as an online program, we have kind of three populations. So we have the population of physical campus students in Westlake who are just taking a couple of courses with us. Maybe they want to take biology with us, and so they're just enrolled in one course with us. And then we have full-time online students where their entire middle school and high school career is online with us. Like that's their entire, high school experience is being online with us. And then we have a third population, which is independent students. These might be like homeschool students or also students from other Christian schools that are interested in just taking a few courses with us as well. So we have kind of three populations that the online school serves. Yeah.
But you only work for the online school, or do you do anything with the physical campus?
Right. Correct. I only work for the online school. So I'm only on campus at graduation just to read our students' names, basically.
So your whole job is online.
Mm-hmm.
Were you attracted to that in the beginning of wanting to work online?
Yes, actually, I don't think that I knew that until I saw it available as a possibility. I am a huge homebody, and I really enjoy the formational process of building a day myself, rather than having that sort of structurally provided for me. And so I think it was a natural fit to have, an online option where you get to do those things. But I will share that I learned about the job in there's kind of a sweet story to it that I always like to share. I was looking for jobs for my husband. He was looking to become a youth pastor. And so we were scouring the internet for job postings and various things. And when this job became available, it was on Craigslist, which is this sort of older program or older thing. I don't know if anybody's familiar with that anymore, but
no, I love that because probably most of the people who will listen to this are of an older generation,
okay,
like us and up. But you're so used to talking to kids, so you have this like need to define what Craigslist is.
Yes. Okay. So I can move on from that. Okay. Craigslist. We're all on the same page. So we were looking on Craigslist, and when I saw this job posting, I was like, oh my goodness, like I want to do this. And so I was, again, not looking necessarily for myself, but then was, compelled to apply because of what was being described that the work would be. But the really sweet part of it is the founder of the online program, her name is Vicki Conway, and she was with us for, I think, the first 5 years or so. And I've told her this story before, and she swears to this day, she's like, Sam, we didn't post on Craigslist. And I was like, well, I don't know what to tell you, but that's where I found it. And so we have like a little bit of like a woo-woo part of this of like, was it a providential thing that I found it on Craigslist? Was it reposted on Craigslist just by an external site? But so I do experience it and did experience it as, a calling. So I do feel that that there's a lot about who I am and what this work is that is a really beautiful fit. Yeah.
I love that. I was reflecting on how, we both identify as Christians, and like the big thing about being a Christian is the belief that like God became incarnate to be with us, and that incarnate element of the faith is such a big deal. And here you are doing like Christian work online, which is a very disembodied space. I mean, you're like a talking head like we are right now, Sure. I don't know. Talk about that. Reflect on that. Do you feel is there a tension there?
Yeah. Sure. Absolutely. I think it's actually a meaningful tension. So much so that I can almost become a little bit dogmatic about this. I actually think that in particular, we need Christians in this work for that very reason, because I think that there is such a high risk that any online community, even, if you just work online for any reason, not even at a school or a church, these more formational spaces, but even just a regular business, that we actually need sort of Christians in this work because of our commitments and loyalty to this very idea that the body counts, that matter matters, right? That God chose a body to be, the way, the truth, and life. And so I think that it's something that is a risk to manage in how you do it, and that managing that risk actually makes it better, right? Like it's because of that tension that you have to be so much more careful about the way that you enter into online interfacing and interactions, which there's a lot there. I don't know how in the weeds all of this is for people is interesting, but I will also share that actually the incarnation is one of the compelling theological reasons that I entered into this work, because for me, a part of the witness of the incarnation is that there is nowhere that God will not go to get to us, right? And so if it is planet Earth that God needs to go, or if it is a digital landscape, that is not impossible for God to enter into. So that was actually a part, I think, of a compelling reason for me. I also would say that we have actually a biblical witness of this very thing. I actually think that Paul's letters for us are a great example of distance learning and distance spiritual formation, right? Just the fact that so often Paul would say, I'm not with you, but I'm with you in spirit. And the production of these letters as a way of doing ministry, he was using the technologies available to him at the time to participate in leadership and ministry and formation without being together in body. And so I looked a lot to his example of how to do this. I would even argue that Paul was even communicating with people that he never shared physical space with. I think initially, of course, these would be churches that had encountered him physically, and then he was continuing the relationship through letters. But I think that the letters continued to speak into, this is, sort of my take on the history, so I want to be honest about that, but that I think those letters then continued to circulate in those communities and continued to be used even in spaces where they had never met Paul physically. And so I think that we actually do have a great sort of license, but also a great example in Scripture for this. Yeah.
The moment you started talking, kind of started on your testimony there of why you feel called into this space. I mean, I thought about Billy Graham and the kind of a classic example of someone who took a medium that Christians were struggling with, kind of had some tension around, and said, "No, let's use this." And and a Christian showing up where people are and saying, "You matter to God," you know.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned in passing, and it ties into my next question, that you used a lot of, you looked to Paul to inform your work as a online chaplain. So I was going to ask you a bit about like what have you learned to make online spiritual formation work, and if you have some ways in which you've looked, you know, the tie-in with Paul. But as you answer that question of what have you learned to make this work?
Yeah, it's funny. This sounds probably really pessimistic, but I feel like it's in line with you coming out and saying, "Hey, the incarnation, how do we reconcile that?" For me, I actually found it really helpful to think about what do I not want it to be, right? And that I think is because I should share this personally. I'm not very personally interested in a lot of technologies. I'm not really interested that I don't necessarily gravitate towards this work because I'm wildly fascinated with the internet. It's more that I think I am, as you shared with the Billy Graham example, I'm interested in how do we use this space despite all of the things that I loathe about it. And so I think for me, it became, okay, looking to the things of our faith that are the most essential. So the incarnation is one you already mentioned. Like, how do we make this have a bodily component to it? And so my strategy for that is, as I'm interacting with students or faculty or staff, that sometimes as a chaplain in, let's say, you know, like in your work, like at a hospital, you are doing the direct to direct, like the person to person work always. Like that is the work. But in my case, sometimes that's the case where we're interfacing like this and I'm sort of having a chaplain experience with them. But other times I'm directing them to participate in other things that are bodily. And then I'm just kind of resourcing or cheering on or empowering them to do that. So for example, let's say that like a while back, I had a student who was really deeply passionate about cancer and cancer research. He had lost a friend to cancer. And so we together pieced several things that he could do for his community service, one of which was a St. Jude's 5K fundraiser. So now he's being equipped by our relationship to go participate in his local town in a bodily way, in this effort to raise funds for St. Jude. So he's now doing this very physical thing, a 5K, from our connection. So I think that's the first one, is how do we make what we're doing in online spiritual formation spaces have a physical component for the people that we're serving. Another example of something where I was like, I don't want it to be something where we are out of sync with nature and with sort of like the rest of creation besides human beings. It can become talking heads in every sense of the word, right? Where all that matters is sort of the pace and the beat that the technology will allow us two humans only to engage in. And so it was like, how do we make sure that the rest of creation that I think we are supposed to sort of be matching pitch with hasn't been lost. And so in a similar way, sometimes what that looks like is helping students, helping staff, helping faculty identify ways to take things that we're doing here in an online setting and then sort of bring them to a physical location, especially in nature. So for example, one time I had a teacher who was going through a series of things. And so we were on the phone together and I walked her through like a prayer experience and she had picked a location in her town. So she had found like a park in her town. And she had a child, so she was like pushing the stroller. So it was this very, wholesome, physical, embedded in creation experience. And so I had sort of looked at the course and figured out like, okay, how do I build a spiritual experience that can be mediated to you through technology, but that you are experiencing as, as something embedded in creation. And then lastly, I think that there was a lot for me of caution around accountability in relationship. We all know this, that when we are in online spaces, that we can just rattle off things that we would never say or do with the accountability of being in person, right? So think about the snarky / all the way up to mean and offensive things that get said on the internet. We certainly cannot have, it's just unacceptable, right? And so how do we sort of model for young people, and I would also say peers and adults too, of what it looks like to say, no, like you are just as accountable for what you say and do in online spaces as not online spaces, and normalizing that, I think, is something that we need. We need to actually be able to see what that looks like. And so there's a lot of, I don't know if coaching is the right word, but maybe being an example, I guess, of that in our setting too. And I would say it's one of the overall witnesses of Oaks Christian Online, not just me specifically, but I think as a whole program of like, this is what it can be like to have real people and real relationships. We feel really proud to share that, like, when someone calls us on the phone, a person answers every time. Like, it's not, we're really trying to push against that idea of kind of turning everyone into robots and avatars that have no accountability to each other. And so that's kind of the third component, is looking for those ways to say, okay, how do we push against that actively, not just hope it doesn't happen, but actually build things and norms in place to prevent those things from happening. Yeah.
So you could even, and this would work for the learner, the asynchronous learner, is that the term? If someone's like on the other side of the world for some reason, but on, a member, part of a learner with your school, you can do this also asynchronously too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, that's the thing. So we've even thought really carefully about the blending of asynchronous and synchronous material, right? And really, again, being careful about why we do absolutely every single thing that we do, which I think that would be true of many organizations, that would be what they're aspiring to. But I think for whatever reason, when it comes to the use of technology, I think that we sort of just use stuff rather than being like, okay, but why are we actually using that platform? And why are we actually going to, make a point to have that policy, right? Like, it can't just be for convenience. That can't be the only reason. There needs to be a theological reason for these choices. Yeah.
That's good. Do you guys have, some churches might have a little, three questions they ask themselves before they decide, to give money to this or to allow their building to be used for such and such. Do you guys have kind of a, or is it just in or just conversations and thinking through together, or do you have like here's our little litmus test of, are we going to go, are we going to say yes to this or not?
Yeah, it's probably closer to the second one. We are kind of in a sweet spot, which none of us can take credit for. It's just the way it went for us, that the online program is still pretty small. It depends on what you mean by small. Like, I guess, sorry, I should share this. Broadly, we are considered a very large program, but I would say we are very small compared to the physical campus in terms of like
give
cost
numbers just to kind of help.
Yeah, so like we have like 800 enrollments at the online program this term, and an enrollment just means a single class. So however many students that is much more difficult to count, because a student might be enrolled in one class or they might be enrolled in 8 classes, but still, I'm a part of. Myself and about 15 of others of us lead a network of people doing this kind of work in physical campuses, and then I'm an online representative. And when I share these numbers, these are considered on the larger side, but our physical campus is much larger than us, and so we kind of have this like both and benefit, where we get to have a lot of the things that everyone loves about a small school or program. where things can still be done through relationship and, through a longer meeting rather than just, having to move through things quickly. But we also, I think, have, some of the fun things about being a part of a larger program, like, we're well funded and we can actually, do some creative things that way. So we tend to lean towards, it's inefficient, but let's circle up about this stuff as long as it takes.
Yeah, good. So I know from a previous conversations that in 2020, when everybody went online, since you were already there, you guys had already been doing this, that you were able to be a support and a resource to other schools that were trying to ramp up an online program to meet the needs of the pandemic chapter of our lives. I'm kind of curious, a few questions on that topic. What were some of the top ways that you got to be a resource, kind of some of the main questions or pain points that others were struggling with they were turning to you to find support?
Yeah, so we did a lot of anecdotal, sort of unofficial, small things, right? Like between all of us as a team, we all know a lot of people who are working in other schools. So we were able to help out in kind of like a friendship, one-to-one way. But officially, we also offered 2 trainings. One was for educators, like just teachers specifically, how to run your classes. And then we also had one that was for spiritual formation specifically. So we offered kind of 2 trainings in that moment that were free and available to schools that were interested. And from all of that, what we were trying to do was have kind of a 2-pronged approach. One prong was, hey, like lead with forgiveness and grace, because what you are facing is something that no one should ever have to do. Like you should never have to convert everything that you do into another language, which is essentially, at a minimum what you're doing. So like, don't let anybody tell you that you should, be awesome at this right away. Like that's just garbage. Like check that.
And the new language was online.
Like online. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So it's like, so first of all, like, I remember leading mine and saying, like, repeat after me. I will be terrible at this. Like, like you have to be okay with, like, we're entering into a season of failure, And so that was like the more, I guess, like chaplaincy component of what we were trying to do. But then the second prong was, kind of helping schools, fellow educators and people who do spiritual formation, at schools. And I think we actually even had a couple of church folks represented, but I'm forgetting now. But they, we were trying to say, however, if you are trying to, rise to the challenge, if you've got some bandwidth, regardless of all of the tragedy and difficulties that you're facing, the thing to think about is to switch the mindset from how do I bring what I do in a physical space to the internet? If you can bear it, try to grieve and let go of what you did in a physical space and then recreate something new in your online space. And so I, for example, when I was leading the one on spiritual formation stuff, a lot of the ways that people are doing spiritual formation in physical campuses is through chapel services. And so I said, I'm going to show you the best I can because I know this is your bread and butter, it's your favorite thing. And so I want to give you some ideas about how to do a chapel on the internet just to get you through. But I also want to encourage you, if you can, to ask yourself, what's the point of a chapel? Well, it's ultimately spiritual formation. So think less about how do I get a chapel onto the internet, but how do I get spiritual formation onto the internet, right? So like letting go of like, it needs to look like, how do I just transfer? So I like to think about this like transliteration versus translation, right? Like we want to actually translate, right? We want to actually say what we mean to say in a new language rather than like, I just kind of like bring those words over.
So transliteration would be trying to do everything that you were doing before, but online now versus translation, kind of letting a new thing happen that, okay.
Correct.
Also, when people are doing things for the first time and not knowing what they're doing very well, sometimes that can be a really interesting space for innovation. And I was just curious, did you Did you bump into any other programs out there during the pandemic that had innovated in a way that they didn't know that they had innovated, and because they didn't know what they were doing wrong?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think that happens most of the time. I think this particular era was so filled with tragedy and challenge that I think people were just trying to survive it. I would say that I was really impressed with the ways in which two organizations, Renovare and the Bible Project, dug deeper during this time, but they had already begun a little bit of online exploration. They had sort of like started to think a little bit about that. And then I think that they really were able to rally in some powerful ways. Like I definitely recommend the both of those organizations. The Bible Project produces online kind of content for you to just experience asynchronously for the most part. And then Renovare actually creates some interactive experiences online that I think are really meaningful. But in general, people were just trying to get through. And so there were, unfortunately, I think more negative examples than positive. I'll give one example of something that I think can be redeemed. I think a lot of churches, again, completely understandably, let's not forget that first prong of like, these were unimaginable circumstances. No one should ever have to, we had such a luxury of time to think about this in a way that like, I get emotional just thinking about it. I can't imagine if I had to do it, right? Like, it's just, it's too much to ask. But a lot of churches, I think in that stress, they started to live stream, and a lot of churches are still doing this now. And that's an example of that transliteration desire, right? How do we just take our service and put it on the internet? And that's such a beautiful desire. But I think that now there are churches that are starting to be like, oh, shoot, like, what do we do now? Because we have all of these people who are like watching our service, but we don't know who they are. Like, we don't know how to connect with them. Like, we're sort of locked in now to this. And so I think that a lot of those churches who now have a heart for online ministry can be invited to kind of be like, okay, what we learned from this was not so much that we're super awesome at online spiritual formation, but that can be taught. What we learned is that like we actually care about people on the internet, which is the whole thing. I mean, that's the biggest piece. And so I think that like even for things that I would consider to be like, oh yeah, that's maybe not like the best call, I think that like it still is really good news, because these churches, even through maybe things that had to just be done in a hurry, they've now learned that they have their heart is in the right place in this. And so now it's just about truing up some of those skills.
Just for kicks, what would be, if you had like just a little nugget of, if someone's listening and they find themselves in that position of, what would you say, what should they do next?
Yeah.
Maybe an opportunity there.
If I'm being just as straightforwardly candid, obviously every church is different, so there would be a lot of that. But in general, I think that it would be really lovely if churches were to make the switch to an interactive online experience. So if it's a church service, if it's a Bible study, whatever. But like and it would have to be a slow transition, because of course now everyone is very used to the live stream model. But I think that what they can do is start to kind of shift towards being able to provide, let's say, a church service that is interactive. So we want to move more and more towards interaction. So for example, if you live stream right now, maybe phase one is, do you have a way to do a live chat, right? Like that's kind of like the first step in like, okay, now you have a chance for people to be able to dialogue with you. That's a great first start, right? And then just continuing down that path of how do we, again, thinking about those three things that we were talking about earlier of how do we make this more bodily? How do we make this more set in nature? And how do we make this more accountability in relationship? So you just then inch towards those goals, right? Is there something we can do next year that's a little bit further down the accountability and relationship line, for example, rather than just kind of ghost watchers? We have no idea who you are. We have no idea if you have questions, if you have like we don't know how to pray for you, that kind of thing.
So it's kind of saying, if we really do care about investing in the real people who are connecting with us online, then kind of counting the cost a little bit to go a little bit deeper than just kind of turning the webcam on, and doing that translation versus transliteration of your church service. And the people who are there in person, you can see them, you can accidentally bump into them in the foyer, you can see if they're falling asleep, you can see if they're way into it, you can see if they're struggling. So that's kind of the live interaction piece that you have that, with people. But if they're online, then what are other ways to kind of create interaction? And it might be really rethinking what it means to have church online, I guess. And
100%.
Kind of a totally different, it probably would look very, very different and totally different because it's been translated, not transliterated.
Correct. Yeah. And
Okay.
I think a key word there that you said is if. I also want to say this, and I'm going to say this up, down, left, and right. I also, the Lord bless you and keep you if you don't care about using the internet to meet with people. You don't have to do this. I think this is my favorite thing to say to people is you don't have to do this. I just think that there's such a pressure that schools and churches are facing of now, since the pandemic, we have to do this. And I'm like, no, you don't. You don't. There are other people doing it. So support them. You can also do that. You can also just say, in the same way that you might fund a missionary, you can fund other online resources if you care about. There's so much freedom in you. If this isn't your thing, you don't have to do this, But I think seeing it as this is the key. I think that too often we're just seeing it as, almost like I can't hear you, let's give you a mic. It's well, it's a little bit different than that. We're not just trying to make it louder. It's actually a different thing that we're doing, that we're invited to do or not do. Not everybody in Paul's time was using letters to bring about the gospel. Just Paul was. We don't know how many other people were doing this, right? It's okay.
That's a good word. I'm curious, Oaks was already online. You already knew what you were doing during 2020 and during that pandemic chapter. Did you as a school grow in any way, learn some new things that have added to who you are today?
Yeah, I think that it was actually what we were just talking about. That deep sense of this is a calling, I think really was activated because for a long time we were just kind of the only people doing this, right? And then it kind of was oh, this is now on the scene. Like people have thoughts about online spiritual formation, they didn't used to have thoughts at all, and so I think that there was a deeper, almost a doubling down on this is something that you can choose to do or not choose to do. But I think that all of us, I would say, somewhat speaking for the rest of us, I think felt this deep sense of I choose this in a deeper way because of that.
Yeah. Okay, so I know that you don't just work with kids, but I think kids are maybe a significant part of your work. There was so we're switching from the 2020 conversation. There was a recent study from Barna that does they do surveys and whatnot, entitled Gen Z and Millennials Lead in Frequent Church Attendance. And I've kind of heard this little buzz here and there, even locally where I live, of just there seems to be a renewed interest among younger folks in spiritual things, and it's kind of surprising people. So because you work with kids, and especially in a faith component through a lens of faith, I'm just kind of curious, when you hear that, does that track or does that surprise you?
Yeah, so there's a lot to say about this. I think that I really appreciate Dr. Kara Powell's work. And more recently, she has been talking about the two-sided coin of revival retreat. So that feels more in line with what I'm seeing, that the retreating of Gen Z, in other words, the leaving, let's say, the I pass on Christianity, I pass on the church, that is deep and wide, and that also the revival is deep and wide. So I think what I would say about Gen Z, if I were going to comment on this, obviously there's a lot of data here to sort of sort through, but I think that that's generally where I tend to land, is that we're seeing a separation, almost like a split in Gen Z. There's like these folks that are like, gosh, I'm starting to get excited about this. And then these ones that are like, I am so very much against this. And so for example, in the chatter that you're describing, I always like to think about like, what is the purpose of data, right? The purpose of data is to help us make better choices for the present and the future. And so what I would say to any hearers who maybe are part of Christian schools or Christian churches who care a lot about the gospel and care a lot about the formation of young people, again, that's an if you really are interested in those things, I wouldn't want this data to tell us, oh, cool, we can enter into cruise control because look, we knew all along the thing that we were doing made sense, and look, it's making sense again. I don't think that's what I would argue. That's not what we're seeing in the data. I think what we're seeing in the data is that Gen Z is brilliant, and that they're very that there are some really, really fascinating things that Gen Z is bringing to the table that is making them capable of overcoming things that they don't like in order to pursue something that they find meaningful, which we haven't seen in a while generationally. I'm going to argue, and I say that as somebody who's older. Like, we're not great millennials. We're not great at that. And so,
say again what we're not great at and what you see Gen Z being great at.
I think that Gen Z is great at overcoming something that they find off-putting or feels wrong at first, and giving it a second try, like being able to kind of see through or see past that in order to kind of keep at something. So let me unpack that a little bit further. So the reason why I don't actually like a whole lot of commentary on Gen Z is because I feel about Gen Z that they are experiencing like first time in human history experiences in a way that millennials and X and boomers that we aren't. As digital natives, they are the first generation in the history of the world to grow up thinking that that everyone has access to a cell phone, that everyone has access to the internet. Like, they are ground zero of that experience. And that is, I think, a fundamentally different human experience than something that we've seen before. Now, people disagree with me about this. I want to really be clear about that. This is just my interpretation of the unfolding events, right? And so I think that it's like, guys, we got to give them a lot of time to sort through that, because they've largely had to sort through this unguided, because none of us have experienced this before. Like, even millennials, we got to have an early childhood or maybe a mid-childhood without these technologies, and then come into them later in life. But Gen Z is the first generation to have it be where their entire upbringing is formed by the phenomenon of the internet, and we are still trying to figure out what the internet means in general. And so I think that what is happening with that is that just like you would do if you were the first people in a place that no one had ever been, I think you stay really open-minded, and you're just kind of like looking around for how things work. And that's what I really love about Gen Z. I also think that Gen Z believes that God is love, and half of our listeners just now were like, "Oh my goodness, like that's just a bunch of kitten talk and whatever." But let's stay biblical together. That this is a major faith claim that we make about God that is throughout Scripture, from the Shema all the way up through Jesus into Paul. I mean, you can't. It's a thread line that we can't undervalue. And Gen Z really, I think in their bones, again, this is my take, but I think in their bones, they really believe that. And so I think they're trying to find that. And I think that they're open to the possibility that that is in the church. I think they're a little more open to the possibility, maybe even somewhat convinced that that is in Jesus, which I'm very excited about. So I would say overall, as we sort through this data together, it's new data. Like within as we speak, it's with months old, not even years old. But as I sort through that, I would say my takeaways are, let's so much respect and admire Gen Z. Let's do that and listen well to where they're coming from. And secondly, let's also be a little bit intellectually honest that it's revival, yes, but also retreat. Let's not lose sight of that. And then thirdly, I would say, let's respond to the data, not with like, cool, then we can just keep doing what we're doing. It's working. But to sort of say, like, we still need to address these things that we have learned from millennials and Gen X. And I would still even argue Gen Z that need to kind of be rethought in Christian, in church. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I'm assuming that some of your opinions or your thoughts on this are coming from real life interaction with real life Gen Zers in your world. So I'm sure it sounds like you probably know some Gen Zers that are still struggling with the idea of church, even as they're maybe open to the possibility that God is love might be present in Jesus.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes, I would say yes to that. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. Huh. Somebody once talked about, the well curve. So it's not just, the bell curve is everything's kind of collected in one mound in the middle, but the well curve, like the phenomenon of people going either for bigger screens or smaller screens, this kind of, so that, people aren't going for just kind of regular screens anymore to watch their content on. They want smaller or they want bigger.
Okay.
And so in that same way that maybe, in Gen Z, yes, you're seeing some folks on this side being more interested in spirituality. And let's be mindful that there's probably maybe as many on the other side of the graph who are still struggling with, being interested in church or, much less having a sense of belonging in church.
Yes, I actually think I had not heard that term, but that is precisely how I see it. Yes, I think.
And I don't know if there's a guy named Len Sweet, and I don't know if he came up with it or if he was just using it, but that's where I first heard of it was with Dr. Len Sweet.
Great.
So I wanted, if you have more to say on that, I'd love you to keep going through on that. But I was kind of curious. Do you AI? Metaverse,
briefly speaking.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, do you have any thoughts on I mean, as you seek to be kind of an evangelist or a missionary in an online space, do you feel any need to also be, or Oaks to go into those spaces as well, or is that like somebody else to do?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that as a school, we are trying to figure this out. I think as all schools are doing, and as to be expected, there are kind of three takes on this, and I think they're all theologically grounded, which is a hard no, like no, never. And then there's a hard yes, all, always. And then there's sort of a middle ground of like, well, with some parameters and guidelines, right? And so my overall stance as an educator is go as slow as you can in sorting through it, with an asterisk that there is a certain amount of urgency for two reasons. One is, it's available, so your students are using it. Like, let me just tell you. And so we have to respond because it's happening. And then I would also add, and this is a little more deeper in the weeds, but my favorite person to get informed about AI from, what I think about AI comes more from my theological sources, but as far as like, what is it and what is it doing? And that is Dr. Jeffrey Hinton. He won the Nobel Prize in 2024 for physics. Some people have called him the godfather of AI. And he is, I don't mean this as an indictment. I think he feels actually some guilt and shame around this. So I'm trying not to reinforce that, but I think he might be a little bit responsible, maybe is the word for some of the early seeds of AI. And he thinks about it this way, which I, as far as I understand it, he's deep in the weeds of the science and sort of the computer science of this. But I think that what he's trying to tell the world in his body of work is we can think about AI in one of two directions. Either can we slow it down, right? To like I wish, right? Like so that we could have more time to figure it out, or can we make it good? Like I mean the capital G good, not like it works well, but good, like it's ethically good. Because what he is finding is that he believes that you cannot slow it down, that now it's in place and that it is learning and it is growing, much like if you had a baby mountain lion. It's gonna grow up and we're gonna blink and it's gonna be big. And so that's what he argues. Like I said, I don't know, but this is what he's arguing. And so he feels like the slow train that like I still wish for, I would love for him to be wrong about this, but I'm not sure that he is, that might not be possible, that this mountain lion is going to grow up and it's going to get its big lion teeth very soon. And so what he is arguing is, okay, since we're now, we have taken this pet lion into our lives and it's going to grow up. And so our best chance is to convince this lion that it should like human beings, that it should root for human beings, that it should advocate for human beings instead of not. And so he is really advocating. So for those of you that are listening that are like in science and math and computer science, it might be like an all hands on deck. I plead with you to see if you can interface or intervene with AI to train, to give it some obedience school, some moral coaching, in order to make it good. That is what I'm, I guess, praying for. That is kind of the macro scale. On the micro scale, schools and churches are just really asking, like, should we use it or not use it? And if so, how much? And as far as answering those questions, I tend to think about it the way that that strength training works, which is a little bit of an explanation here. Is I think that, as we've moved towards a more sedentary lifestyle, that what we've had to do is have more strength training to kind of counterbalance that. And I would argue that if we are going to move more towards, okay, I'm going to try to save time here and use, whatever, ChatGPT to give me a recipe. Like if I'm going to do that, right, I'm going to kind of shortcut this. Then I would argue that then you need to, for the sake of your mind and your soul and your body, to kind of then have another part of your life that you intentionally counterbalance that with. So I think if you're going to sort of do more of this, then you need to balance it out by more of that, right? Like, so I don't think that people 1,000 years ago needed to strength train, right? But the reason that we think we need to strength train now is because we need to counterbalance the muscle deterioration that we're experiencing from aging and in a sedentary environment, right? So I think it's like, okay, how do we think about that same parallel in a soul work kind of way, right? So if we are going to borrow from AI intelligence in order to shortcut some things for us as human beings, then I think that we need to long cut some things in order to stay to our humanity, as image bearers.
That's good. I mean, I had heard somewhere, maybe it was from the work of Dr. Hinton, that bit about, helping AI be good. And I would just, I just kind of went to like, so when I work with AI, I should say please and thank you, like things like that, like, yeah, thank you for that answer. Can you help me a little bit more, but there's also that training to be good thing, obedience training. That's an interesting thing to think about.
Yeah. It's like, again, not to like terrify. I know that AI feels very scary. God is still God. The world's in God is still on the throne. Like, let's have some perspective. But I think that, that it seems that in the data that it can and has intentionally deceived. So it will lies, basically, like, which is different than producing a false answer, but like it knowingly has produced false answers, right? So people are kind of like, okay, how do we provide some kind of coaching to it to say, like, bad dog. You know what I mean? Like, don't do
Mm-hmm.
that. And so I think those kinds of questions, again, for any that are listening that are good with science, computer science, coding, you know, all of this, like, I think it's an all call to do this, you know, to train this little mountain lion that we have as a pet now.
Yeah. And even on a spiritual formation level, I want, you know, just for me to remember that, you know, being kind, as often as I communicate from Josh out to the world, whether it's to you or whether it's to a chat bot, you know, like, just trying to, you know, it doesn't cost me too much extra time to be kind in
very odd,
in all the ways I communicate,
Totally.
whether the person is a person or not. So even, interesting. I'm curious if, as you look on your personal or professional horizon, if there's anything that you see that that's kind of a challenge and or something that's kind of exciting you, that you see on its way. So something you're working through, and maybe it's the same thing. Maybe the challenge is the thing that's exciting.
Yeah, I would say the challenge is AI. I think I feel very proud to be a part of a team that we are, I think, approaching this with a lot of integrity and a lot of good questions and a lot of practice, almost like what we were talking about earlier about the pandemic, of like repeating to each other, we're going to make a lot of mistakes. Like, this is not something that we're going to get right away. And so I think we're entering into a season of challenge around how to appropriately respond to AI. And I think we feel a sense of responsibility to our constituents, both other partner schools and the networks that we're involved in, as well as students and so on, because we are in a unique place to be able to respond to this because of our experience, at least with online formation, including spiritual formation. And so we want to do this very well, and it's very hard. So I think we're entering into like a phase of like, there's a lot of I don't knows and trying new things and putting things in courses and seeing what happens and that sort of thing. So it's a challenge, but I think that it's a worthy one. As far as what I'm hopeful for, I am excited about kind of continuing on in the work of trying to provide an alternative of what online spiritual formation and all formation can be like. I still feel as sad as any of you when we see social media, you know, head off the rails, or when we get an email from someone that we're like, you would never say this, right? Like, so I think just a growing and deeper sense that like, yeah, we need more thoughtfulness and more theology around netiquette, around how we use these technologies and what we do and do not do in these spaces. And so I think that I'm hopeful for like, okay, we march on, like this is still needed. Like we're not done. We haven't figured it out yet. And so I think there's something faithful, I guess, about that. Maybe not like yay exciting, but maybe like the excitement of faithfulness, I think. Yeah.
With change, you know, I've heard that, you know, there is some phrase, some term for like the pace at which things change. I don't know if you know offhand what that term is, but
No.
It's got a name. But that window is getting smaller, you know, like that you know. Do you feel like you're going to get too old pretty fast?
Oh,
like,
yeah.
I mean, you're a millennial. Like, are you going to be too old pretty fast to even or I don't know, or does your theology say no? Like, I think there's always space for a person to be a person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
no matter what
I think
no matter the
already-
medium.
Yes. Yeah. I think already I'm too old for the technology. Like, there's just so many sharper, better, you know, like things that I'm just constant. I mean, the platform you and I are using to have this conversation, I was unfamiliar with it and I'm very impressed with it. Like, it's just, I'm already behind the curve in terms of the tech because of the movement towards synchronicity, like what you're describing of just the rate of change becoming exponential and, you know, like a parabola rather than, you know, a linear. But I think that, so that I'm already too old for, but I think that what you're saying still counts, which is we are still going to need elders. We're still going to need gray hair in the room for all areas of life always. Like we never actually sort of run out of that need. And so I think it will just continue to morph into, how can I support what is coming up behind me rather than getting in the way? How can I empower it, support it? But I think I've got a little bit more time, but I definitely think it happens faster. And I've seen a lot of that data too, that sooner and sooner in a professional space, that's different than us as people. But I think that professional spaces, you are sort of running against the clock a little faster. So yeah, I think we have to acknowledge that, but I just don't think that we have to say much more than that. Like, I don't think that means that your worth declines or something like gross like that. I think it's just more like, yeah, like there are parts of this job that I will quickly become too old for. And then there are other parts that I won't, right? So it's like that.
We have a few minutes left. Anything that you didn't get a chance to share, or something that you thought of along the way that you'd like to put out there?
Yeah, I think just maybe a word of encouragement again for listeners, whoever you may be, just to remember that again, you don't have to do this, and that it's okay to do it, but it's also okay to say, yeah, I don't really want to do this, and then I think.
Why is that okay?
Because I think that we can't do everything. I think this is a myth of our time. And I think churches, this is a little bit critical, but I think churches and schools try to do it all and think that that means good service. And I think that that's a major error. And I think that frankly, the secular world has told us this, that we're wrong about this, by specializing a little bit better. And we hate to specialize. We want to sort of be the total provider for all things for students and, and congregants and stuff. But I think it's okay to sort of be like, we do this, do small things with great love, right? Like we do these small things very well, and we don't have to do all of them. And so I think that there's an embracing of smallness that we need in our time that isn't being done a whole lot. I think we feel like we have to be a jack of all trades. And I think instead it's like, let's very, very excellently do the things that we do, and let's do them very simply, and let's do them very smartly. And then let's trust. I mean, this is another piece, right? Is like, let's really trust the other people who are doing their things,
I think about the biblical, let your yes be yes and your no be no. So like, yeah, if you're gonna say yes, like say yes, know? And you can also say no too.
Yes.
I interrupted your encouragement there. Did you get to finish?
That's it.
You don't have to do this. But you can. Yeah. Well, Sam, thank you so much for joining us and sharing a lot from where you sit in the world and giving us a little peek into it. Appreciate it, and trust it'll be helpful for any of our listeners. So
thanks, Josh. It's good to be here.